it. I haven't.
You're gonna love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's worth it in IMAX. Honestly, I don't know if you can, but
I think Jeannie and I are going today.
yeah. And in the story, like the way that the books talk about the mentats in Dune, it makes it more obvious what they're doing, but the AI comparison is there because the mentat role is basically a human supercomputer. They're supposed to be they're like an advisor to the the leader,
Yeah.
whatever faction the leader's from,
Yeah.
because they can calculate without letting emotion influence their reasoning.
Uh huh.
So that's the role that they have to play.
Uh huh.
But even in his world, he doesn't glorify that as like that's the best advice you can get. It's that's understood as a category of wisdom.
Yeah.
It's just cold rational science.
Yeah.
And then there's a different advisor to the king, which is I think it's called the truth sayer.
Yeah.
Which is the person who's
the Bene Gesserit.
listening. Yeah, it's like the Bene Gesserit training, which would be more akin to the prophetic tradition or the priestly tradition, which is like listening to what's being said and then detecting the nuance of what's true, what's
motive,
hiding.
falsehood.
Yeah. It's almost using pure emotion.
Well, the one is pure logic, the other is pure discernment.
Yeah, so it's kind of, I mean, yeah, it's oversimplifying it to a degree because I think that personal AIs are going to be a non-negotiable part of human social interactions in the future.
Well, wait. Okay, so you just said personal AIs, and I know we need to talk about that because you were sharing
Yeah,
a
we
little
talked
earlier.
about it before we were
right.
filming.
But let's unpack a little bit more. Dune's a worldwide phenomenon. I get that, but not everyone knows. Like it's set in the year 10,000 something AD, essentially, of our world is the idea. 7,000 years more into the future, 8,000 years into the future. I need a mentat. but Frank Herbert imagined kind of this interesting trajectory that he created these compensating systems in the future for what he imagined essentially in our immediate context were going to be the problems of AI.
Yeah, I don't know how much AI was like, that was his.
I don't know that was the language he used, but what was the quote?
Yeah, the one about thou shalt not make a machine in the likeness of a human mind.
Right. I mean, that's him, whether he had the language of artificial intelligence or not.
Mm-hmm.
That's what that's addressing.
Mm-hmm.
One of the laws that governed the early trajectory that became the year 10,000 that we're watching on the screen is thou shalt not. It was this kind of mosaic code.
Yeah.
Thou shalt not make a machine. How?
In the likeness of a human mind.
Okay.
That's the quote.
So
a couple other good ones we were looking at too before we started.
A machine in the likeness of the human mind. I mean, that's the whole idea here is artificial image, the artificial imago Dei, to attempt to replicate the uniqueness of humanity in an algorithmic fashion. And yet, like you've read further into the series than I have. I grew up a Lord of the Rings fan, and Dune was there as the sci-fi competitor, but I didn't get into it as much as I have of late. So what explain some of that history, because it essentially put the Dune system with the guild and spice and the mentats and all of this was the attempt of the future of our civilization to retain human functionality as opposed to algorithmic machine dominance.
Yeah, House Atreides in Dune is the human race. Like that's the future of humanity, which is trying to be influenced by the Bene Gesserit women that want to get the bloodline right. But Atreides symbolizes human potential, and then all the other forces conspiring against House Atreides
To
represents.
overwhelm that.
Yeah, and but here's a couple other quotes by Herbert that shows that he's not an AI doomer, as we
Uh-huh.
would say now. One of them is this isn't a Dune quote. I think this is just him talking. Technology is both a tool for helping humans and for destroying them. This is the paradox of our times, which we're compelled to face. So both
Well,
a tool for help and for destruction.
I mean, that's kind of the narrative tension of this whole conversation. The intersecting benefit ratio cost analysis. What is it going to cost if we keep going purely in pursuit of the benefit of AI
Mm-hmm.
without mindfulness of the cost? And all of society is right now just fascinated. I mean, Claude 3 just came out, which wasn't really even in the conversation. And it's a French startup that is now producing, according to 10 metrics, better AI than ChatGPT or anyone else. And approaching near human level intelligence is the idea. And they will admit, to say near human level intelligence, there's not even consensus around
Yeah, what is that?
what that means, because does that mean the thing really understands the way we would say intelligence understands, or does it just say it so sophisticatedly mimics understanding that we don't know the difference? Okay,
Mm-hmm.
but the fact is, no one was talking Claude 3 months ago.
Yeah.
And now it is the top of the heap, and the arms race continues to top it. And a year ago, text to image was all the rage. You could go on Midjourney or DALL-E and type in, a bunny rabbit in an astronaut suit eating cheese on the moon, and you could get that. And that was incredible. But now we do text to video. Now we're gonna in this year of political elections, 50% of the world is going to be voting this year, and video is now at the point. They just came out with these news reports that there's all of these young black urban voters seen with Donald Trump to create the illusion of this groundswell of support. The only problem is they're all AI voters. I mean, they're all AI images. They aren't real. So AI images and what happens when it becomes video become these tools of misinformation. And the misinformation is managed by nations and multinational corporations with their own agendas. And all of this it's too much for any single person to keep up with. 20
Mm-hmm.
years ago, we were already buried in 24/7 news cycles. Once upon a time, 50 years ago, you would get the news at 8 in the morning and 5 at night. And then it became 24/7 news. And now it's not just official news outlets, it's every blogger, every potential. So we're inundated with information and sources and agendas. But now they can put images and video that you can't tell the difference on. And you don't know who's pushing that agenda.
Mm-hmm.
And now we get to why we need a personal AI.
So that it will interpret that for us. Yeah, so that we don't need to know.
Because it can track down the 5,000 possible sources that came from, and it becomes our own personal mentat, right? I mean,
Yeah, I mean,
take it and run with it.
I think that's the role. I think we need more of the Benny Gesserit way.
Yeah.
As a response to that, we need more truth sayers.
Right.
We need more people that are listening and that are giving their take about. I think this has an angle to it.
Right.
But I think the idea of the mentat is just giving you more mechanistic interpretation of like, here's where this came from, here's what this is saying. It's not here's why this is being said, here's why this agency reported it. It's more ones and zeros.
Well, okay, but explain the genesis of this, because you were just listening to a conversation with Lex Friedman and
The AI, the Jan LeCun, I think is how you say his name. He's the chief AI scientist for Meta. Yeah, that came out a few days ago, and um, Lex was airing out a concern for him, or he was asking Jan, what's gonna happen when our AI overlords, so called, um, put out information that can potentially be manipulative and that can get people to just do what they want them to
Wait,
do.
that's I have a hard time with that at the very beginning, right? Put out information that could potentially be manipulative.
What a concept.
Right. We can't. We have to trust all news that comes to us.
Yeah. Well, this is how just to like kind of sidestep in that tone. That's why these conversations tend to not be productive, is because there are people that already imagine us with a little tinfoil hat on
Right.
to say that there's information that's being intentionally disseminated with the purpose of manipulating
Right.
our perspective.
Right.
That is, I don't know why that's so hard to believe, but there are people that are just like, I just want to. I think the domino effect of like accepting that as a reality, and then the consequences of how that would make you think twice about what's going on in your life on your feed of your own perspectives. I think it's just too, might just be too intimidating. Like for imagine somebody who, what if somebody took all of the COVID vaccines and all the boosters and then was presented with compelling evidence that that might not have been in their health interest? Maybe at that point it's like, well, but I think I'm feeling okay, and so like I just don't really need to go down that rabbit hole. Like if
Right.
what's best case scenario? I become convinced that I made a bad decision and it has an adverse effect on me.
Right.
Okay, so I'm feeling okay. I just don't need to know about that.
Right.
So it's hard to admit when you have a vested interest in a certain opinion. It's hard to be unbiased.
Well, I may go down a rabbit trail for 3 or 4 minutes on this that takes us a little off course, but it's actually worth the conversation because you just gave a very optimistic, a very fair, optimistic, and generous kind of view of analysis of that person who just doesn't want to consider the negative outcome. But really, there's a much more profound worldview difference. And it's part of the entire re education of Western civilization around a Judeo Christian ethic, which says that the heart of man is born into sin. It's the idea of original sin that puts us out of the womb at odds with God and with each other. That says there is an orientation. The Jewish rabbis talked about the evil inclination. That's what they called the sin nature. The evil inclination, the thing that makes us self-destructive, selfish, to prefer to destroy someone else than ourselves in self-preservation, and all the impulses and decisions we make that require a regeneration, to be born again, to change that evil inclination to a redeemed persona, to cause a darkened spirit to become alive again. And that's all become such a the liberalization of education and politics takes a fundamentally different view. People are born essentially good, and they're enculturated to racist systems and evil systems and greed systems. It's not nature, it's nurture. And so if they just have enough education and knowledge, they can self-illuminate and see, well, that's not the path I want to choose. That's not the path I want. It assumes that with enough knowledge, you can disciple out, you can sanctify yourself out of a fundamentally evil outlook. And therefore, everything that comes from that perspective is about give us more knowledge, give us more tools, give us more money, give us more of this, and we will change ourselves. And the flip side is you can't change yourself because you're the problem. You have to have something greater than you change the dynamic for you. And so America was built, the whole idea of the separation of powers, the judicial, the legislative, the executive, was because all three of those were once contained in a single person of the king. The king was the executive, judicial, and legislative branch and drove the whole agenda. And the American experiment saw that the concentration of power had to be broken up. And this, what we call checks and balances, was built around the idea that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, which has its origins in the idea of original sin, that there is something in humanity that has to have checks and balances on itself, especially the higher the strata of power at the federal level of government, at the, the decision makers, etc. So that is at the base of this conversation because most of those ideas have now been eradicated from popular thought. Parents don't think their kids have an evil inclination. They think they just need better tools. People in general don't want the government to have checks and balances. They just want them to be effective and efficient at taking care of them. And there's an assumption of noble motives. And if we just know the facts, and all of this paves the way for AI to give us the facts, to give us our mentats, and for us to not have any concern for a private agenda that could be narcissistic, abusive, authoritarian, domineering, and evil, because we fundamentally trust what once upon a time was fundamentally distrusted. And the only reason it could be trusted was because it had successfully been fractured with the balance of powers, the checks and balances, that made it trustworthy. And now power is being reconcentrated in these multinational organizations. They can raise their own armies. They have more money than countries do. And nations themselves are concentrating power in despots and authoritarian figures. And all of the nations are generally saying we want democracy, but they don't want the burden of it. They don't want the responsibility of it. What they essentially want is to be taken care of. And that makes everyone ripe for the exploitation of knowledge systems that feed that thought, I can achieve my own enlightenment and status and ability if I just have enough knowledge.
Yeah. I'm wondering how helpful democracy is in a time like this.
Well, that's that. Now you're touching on something really interesting because that becomes its own alluring, like now. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I don't know how to go at your speed with that thought, but that's like it. Democracy isn't an American idea,
Yeah.
But that wasn't. Greeks of that era weren't all agreeing, yes, this is the best solution. It was kind of like, well, we got to do something.
Right.
So like, let's let this run its course. But there were smart people that were thinking this is not going to end well.
Well, a democracy, and in our particular instance, a republic, is the best expression of the dynamic of free will. To recognize that people are independent moral agents and to simply dominate them externally isn't to give the full potential to a society in self-governance and other things that can represent the highest ideals of freedom, individual sovereignty, and yet security and national cohesion. But there is no such thing as a democracy that survives without personal responsibility. The whole idea is there is a contract made at the highest levels between the idea of that democracy and the people who are willing to bear the responsibility of sustaining it. And as we have fragmented and fractured and been indoctrinated with these other ideas that remove our responsibility, it's, there's all the sociological commentary on how entitled society is, how we expect handouts, we expect the government to do this or that. Government becomes dad, and we want dad to pay the bills. And now there's not personal responsibility. And so that at some point, the corrosive, eroding factors there make it almost impossible for a democracy to sustain itself. And yet, if it has the illusion of giving freedom to the people, and what the people want is more and more slavery to artificial systems, then democracy is enabling the people to destroy themselves. And that's where you could come along and say a more authoritarian figure, a Putin in Russia, who says, well, we just aren't going to do this, that, or the other, and there's no legislative process, there's no this, that, or the other. He just says, we aren't going to do this. That almost becomes protective for the people who can no longer govern themselves because they don't carry the internal resources of previous generations at a philosophical or moral level to do so.
Yeah, it's hard to really imagine some ideal, like some utopian government system. I don't know what example from history you could pick and say that worked really well, because I can't think of an example of where something lasted longer than 2 generations,
Right.
and maintained its integrity.
Right.
You can't even pick like David and Solomon. That seems like a great combo
Right.
with father and son.
Right.
Like, how did that turn out?
Yeah. 2 generations and it's done.
So what is the answer? I think the coming on 250 years of the American way, that's several generations, but it's because it allows for so much ratification of the document, and basically the federal government saying, here's the bumper rails, and it's up to the states to really legislate how it's affected.
Right.
That seems like the most generous use of judicial authority.
Yeah.
And that's now technology and scientific innovation is just exponentially outrunning the legislative process.
Right.
Like I just can't imagine that we're ever gonna effectively legislate artificial intelligence systems. Just I think we're almost gonna have to grandfather in AI into the Bill of Rights.
Right.
Because we're not gonna know what to do with them by the time that they're functionally human.
And that's part of the Moloch, the dilemma of Moloch.
Yeah.
Is it's already beyond what we can manage.
Yeah.
And it's accelerating in its negative potential consequence.
Yeah, there's that impetus to accelerate as fast as possible, because otherwise you're not competing.
Right.
Like the fact that the French have a system which is competing with, like, it's just as a matter of like geopolitics. That's not a French priority the way that it's been in an American capitalist priority.
Right.
It's not like they can't do it just as well. It's just we have so many companies that are world leading.
Right.
In this domain. So the fact that they have one that might even be better, that's just like you're saying. It's like, where did that come from?
Right.
Well, they've been working on it this whole time.
Right.
And it's the difference between 2023 text to video and 2024 text to video looks like 20 years of development. It looks
Right.
like going from a Super Nintendo to a PS5.
Right.
But it happened in 1 year.
Right.
Another quote from the guy that Lex interviewed, the Meta chief AI scientist, he was saying some of the stuff we've been working on for a decade, it's really in the last couple years that there's actually been significant progress.
Right.
Because the curve is exponential.
Right.
So what is it going to take to even like have a governing body that meaningfully mediates that influence on people? I think we're going to have to do what you said, which is return the locus of control to the individual.
Yeah.
Which Peterson's been yammering on and on about this for a few years
Yeah.
now.
Yeah.
He's been pretty, and this isn't his idea. He's citing um, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, for example.
Yeah.
He's citing Russian sufferers, who were
Right.
philosophers that realized it is every single person's fault that this is happening.
Right.
And I think, because I'm quoting Peterson, but I think he's quoting Solzhenitsyn saying that every individual is responsible for everybody else in the world.
Uh-huh.
He just didn't want to let go of any internal locus of control. But what you're saying, that's like summarizing the sort of hyper liberal. I think they want government to be mom more than dad. Is external locus of control. Feed me, nurture me, affirm me, sustain me, be my umbilical cord. Just keep me alive so that I can just float. Give me universal basic income.
I mean, you just described the Matrix, right? We're all in our pod.
Yeah.
Being sustained. And as long as the illusion of normalcy is all around us, we're quite happy.
Yeah. Yeah, the Matrix, I love the mechanism for Neo's awakening, which is his own curiosity, but then being willing to follow.
Right.
So, yeah, you have to, like, there's a part of you that needs to be searching, that needs to be asking the right questions, but then eventually there's going to have to be a part of you that goes where you feel like you're being led. You don't know what's going to happen, but that's the adventure, right?
Right.
You have to be willing to voluntarily go into uncharted territory.
Yeah.
But you have to do that because, like, you would do that, according to the Matrix, you would do that because you've already been wrestling through that, and you've been having sleepless nights, and you've been searching, and you've been asking, and you've been meditating, you've been thinking, what's wrong with this picture?
Right.
And then you're not going to get the first thing that happens is a little mushroom capsule shows up in an envelope, and he just gets high and sees the world. It's like he has to go on this dangerous route to find Morpheus, who then tells him, there's not enough time for me to tell you what you need to do.
Right.
But you got to do this thing first. You got to be willing to transform. Then on the other side of transformation, things are going to start to make sense.
Right.
So that's at the individual level.
And that curiosity, Morpheus says, it's like a splinter in your mind, I think.
Yeah.
You know, it's that thing you can't even get a hold of, but you can't get away from it either. As you were talking about 10 years of development, the scary thing is not that Claude came out of nowhere, because it's 3.0.
No offense to the French.
Right. Version 1, version 2, we're on the radar, but given the resources and momentum of OpenAI and Meta and Google, for Claude 3.0 to so dominate now, which is going to last about 3 months, and then, you know, but the French do have enough of a capitalistic motivation to want to get it out there and to get users to subscribe and to benefit from it. The real scary thing is a nation like China that has who knows what the equivalent is, Claude 5.0, ChatGPT 6.0, and they're just keeping it underground and using it at a military level, an intelligence level, there's so much more they can gain, not in the capitalistic sense of subscribers and revenue, but at the level of subterfuge to govern elections and shift economic policy and aggregate data far beyond a team of 1,000 of the brightest Chinese scientists and analysts can't do. What their secret AI is churning away 24/7, and all it needs is electricity. It doesn't need food. It doesn't have any emotions. It doesn't have disappointing days.
Yeah, and I don't even know if we need to. I don't think we have to grant them a more intelligent system than anybody else has. I think the danger is the fact that they have communist intentions.
Well, absolutely. My only point with that is what the headlines talk about Claude 3.0. Wow, look at how amazing it is scary in its own right. But then you have to think, what is the headline that's never a headline? What is the technology that's never released?
Behind the curtain.
Right. because a lot of these nations don't care about subscribers and revenue. They have other purposes for their AI, and they aren't going to announce to the world what they have. And there's a communist intention.
Yeah, this is where I feel like there's like a veil of time where what's behind that curtain is on the ground level from the future. Like the Elysium movie, I think is a good analogy. The Matt Damon one,
Yeah.
where you go to the moon and they live in utopia and they have this technology that keeps you youthful, and it's literally not available on Earth.
Right.
The only way to access that reality is to get off world, and then so it's almost like the journey from the Earth to the moon is an analogy for a wormhole that brings you to the future Earth, where things are what they should be. And it's literally a different planet, but what's the difference at that point? You're on a planet, you have what you need, there's food growing, there's
Yeah.
social life, you're healthier. So it would be accurate as far as the Elysium analogy goes to say like the people who live in that strata, in that echelon of society, are living in a lifestyle that is futuristic compared to low socioeconomic status people.
Mm-hmm.
Like people that have a lot of comorbid
Comorbidities.
illnesses.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're like people that need medication for chronic conditions, that are underemployed, that are undereducated, that have no upward mobility, that even don't really have lateral mobility. These are not people who live in the same world as the guys who their job is to work with Aladdin to trade at BlackRock. Like
Mm.
the Aladdin engineers, whatever is going on at this place that is generating trillions of dollars of wealth year over year. No,
Controlling.
yeah,
Controlling trillions
because
of
it's
dollars.
not generating that.
It's controlling. Yeah.
It's just so hard to even wrap your mind around the way that they see the world compared to somebody who's in debt for 50 grand
Right.
and feels like I'll never get out of 50
Right.
grand in debt.
Right.
I don't think they see numbers that small in BlackRock.
No.
That to them is pennies on the dollar.
Right.
So that's a level of existence which is not socially compatible, and that's becoming crystallized in a way that's more obvious now. Maybe there's kind of always been that power dynamic. Like maybe Genghis Khan looked this way to the people
Right.
that he was invading,
Right.
riding in on 5 elephants at the same time, and
Right.
they're like, "What world are you from?"
Right.
Maybe that always looked that way, but what we know is the plan of the global elites, as they're so called, which is like a Klaus Schwab type of guy
Yeah.
showing up like Darth Vader and saying you're gonna own nothing and you're gonna like that.
Right.
He's just lost the ability to read, like, to hear that in the room.
Right.
Like that's absolutely terrifying to hear.
Right.
He's thinking, I'm helping you out, bro.
Right.
Like, you're gonna love it. Did you
Right.
not hear me?
Right. Right.
Yeah. So who's gonna own it then? Oh,
Okay.
you're gonna own it. Oh, right.
So okay, but now that seems like a good way to circle back to this idea of personal AIs. Because now with the philosophical difference between a sin nature and we just need more information and we can self-sanctify and humanity is fundamentally good versus no, we need guardrails.
Mm-hmm.
That at a philosophical difference all the way up to the increasing disappearance of the middle class. There's a poverty class, and not just a wealthy, but an ultra wealthy, ultra powerful,
There's an Elysium class.
an Elysium class with multinational corporations that are as powerful as nations in their
Their political leverage.
political economic leverage, and nations that are battling, and AI is increasingly the tool of the disparity, but it's held out like a golden apple to the least suspecting, most trusting, who have been conditioned to need the umbilical cord, and so they think I can't survive without this next thing, and so now the information that's going to come from these multinational and national entities is all agenda driven to increase the disparity. because that's ultimately what they want. They want more, and you're going to own nothing and like it.
Yeah.
And yet AI is becoming the wrapper, the gift wrapping for a poison pill to say, but without this, you can't even function in society, and your only hope of advancement is to embrace all of the benefits of the AI system. So now every news release is potentially an agenda. That's already true now, but they're using AI to modulate and massage facts and information at a level of sophistication we can't even begin to comprehend. So how do you, as a lowly schlep that's $50,000 in debt, right? How do you manage 50 entities that are all feeding you information you may or may not need? You have to have your own AI.
Yeah.
You have to have your own mentat,
right,
to discern and filter what's real and true or false and manipulative.
Right, which won't do the truth sayer role. It will do the mentat role.
Right.
It will aggregate data and offer me a calculation, but that's not it can answer what questions and how questions, but it can't answer why questions.
Right.
And I think we're losing that muscle is atrophying.
Right.
En masse.
Yeah.
There's just people that don't know how to ask good questions. And so there's this reinforcement process for asking bad questions that give you bad answers, and that being interpreted as a good answer that came from a good question. Like there's that kind
but
of
even explain the scenario a little bit more, because you were talking me through, like, practically speaking, why does everyone need an AI, and how's that going to interact? How are our AIs going to interact with each other? And
yeah, there's going to be, because social interactions are increasingly digital.
Yeah.
And the technology is, like, I think it's just a pretty obvious
trajectory.
Yeah, obvious trajectory that the future becomes increasingly digitized. We're not developing technology which is analog.
Right.
We're changing the definition of analog to make it make sense in the digital world.
Right.
So if I'm interacting to you primarily online, I am going to become increasingly susceptible to the pirates of the digital world, which know how to hack your information, know how to scam you out of money, who know how to pull whatever data they can get from you to harvest your credit card information and your bank information and sell that to other people. So, like, there's all of
manipulate your political perspectives. Shape your investment preferences.
Yeah, all of that.
All of that.
So whatever is, like, when an algorithm puts something onto your screen, there's a motivation behind that. It doesn't mean that it's like, you don't have, like, your FBI agent who's just like,
right.
he, now let's show him this meme.
Right.
It's an algorithm that's trying to show you what you are looking for.
What you've already expressed interest in without realizing it.
Yeah, which is why there's that echo chamber
right.
Reality where each person's feed is different.
Yeah.
It's not because I am aggregating my feed. It's because I am unconsciously communicating with the AI system underpinning the algorithm that is showing me what I don't even know I want to see. But then when I react to it, well, like, you see something that's funny, so you linger on that, and it notices that, oh, you spent more time looking at this. I can find more content that other people also look at, and then I'll give that to you.
Yeah.
So as that's happening increasingly in the digital world, and our interactions are required those access points. Like, it requires the smartphone device that has the app that then you do the text communication.
Yeah.
But it will get to the point where I can just tell my phone, DM my buddy Joey this meme.
Right.
And I'll just speak to my device, which will do what I wanted it to do.
Right.
So it's going to get to that point of just the way that we interface with technology, which I think I'm answering your question here.
Yeah.
To interface with technology will become increasingly hands off, and just I'm saying what I want to happen, and now it's happening.
Let me give a more practical metaphor for you to interact with. So I think it was like 15 years ago. I think his name was Tim Ferriss. I don't remember exactly, but I think Tim Ferriss, he came out with this it was its own little blockbuster deal, the 4-hour work week. And he was basically pushing how he had learned to leverage cheap labor in India for personal assistance. And so the things that he was spending hours a week doing himself and couldn't afford to hire a full-time assistant, he had, his call center, his personal scheduler. He had 2 or 3 kind of this network of pennies on the dollar labor out of India. They spoke good English and they could manage his life so that he was putting in 4 hours instead of 40 hours. And it was more efficient and cost. So the idea was come up with a fleet of assistants to help manage my life. Now AI is promising this in various ways. There's AI calendars, AI, communication systems. Google demonstrated 4 or 5 years ago, before this was really even exploding, an AI personal assistant where you could just say, hey, schedule the dentist. And they had the demos where you would hear the voice on the phone, call the dentist. Hi, this is, so-and-so scheduling for so-and-so. I'm looking to get an appointment at 2 p.m. The person says 2 p.m. doesn't work. Oh, okay. Well, would 2:30 work? And that thing is correlating to your calendar, but it's speaking, an artificial intelligence is speaking and managing that for you.
Right. So that'll just communicate with the AI of the dentist office.
Right. And so now that was a real person at the dentist office that was being tricked by my AI, but they're just going to get their AI.
Yeah.
And so everyone has AIs that either specialize or generalize a range of functions, and AIs are now doing the business of talking to each other rather than people talking to each other, which means the AI is going to give me the counsel I need to know, is that AI telling the truth? Is that AI,
Well, I think it'll just be it'll just be colder. Like it'll just be, because that's what's going to be required. Like by the time the dentist office has an AI, why would I want to call and talk to an AI? So if I can just have my AI do that, then I'm like, good. Now I don't have to deal with that. That would be annoying.
I just get the alert, show up at the dentist office at 2:00.
Yeah. So we just increasingly outsource our social connections to the AI thing that does the boring thing of talking to people.
But it's not just social connections. It's the disciplines of the mind that actually make us human. It's like, I got to figure out when on my calendar this works. I got to pick up the phone and call and talk to someone. I have to work through and negotiate with their calendar. Those are human enterprises. They're part of what make us human. So it's not just the social, what was the term you used? The social interactions. It's not just social interactions. It's mental disciplines. It's it's part of us. And we're going to trade all that away for the efficiency of not having to think about it. And essentially, our mentats are just going to order our days and tell us what to do. And that all sounds crazy now, but 10 years from now, I don't know that it's going to be so crazy.
Yeah, I don't think it's stoppable. Like that will literally happen. And that's so Lex Friedman asked Jan LeCun. There's just a very recent conversation, so it's fresh in my mind. He asked him, how will gullible people not be manipulated by these like AI narratives from on high of like what the news says or what's going on politically, and Jan's like, you'll have your own AI assistant. Why would you be? It's like it's everything's going to be filtered through your AI, which will acculturate itself to your preferences and what you value.
So the checks and balance to a more powerful AI is for your own AI to be savvy enough to see through it.
Yeah, which it might be. It's not like you're gonna have a little robot that follows you around and talks to you. It's just like that's the like the Dune Mentat is the mythological embodiment of what a personal AI is doing. It like the iPhone X has a AI chip. The
Right.
A11 chip is AI powered
Right.
because it's able to adapt to to your user feedback.
Yeah, I think it's up to A14 or 15 or 16
Yeah,
now,
now
but
they
it's
have the
been
M chips
yeah,
and it,
yeah,
but
yeah.
it's all doing the same thing.
Right.
So it's like it's not like this is new technology that will one day be implemented. It's like you just use it
Right.
and you don't realize that what's going on is you actually have a relationship to this thing.
Something behind the scenes is doing a whole lot of stuff and filters it down to a simple interactions for us, but there's a tremendous amount of inventory, mental inventory that's being carried by that AI on our behalf.
Yeah. So we will have when like when he's talking about having personal AIs that just filter all that data for you, that's already happening to a large degree. Like every time I pull up my Apple News feed, I'm getting a particularized feed that it's assuming I'll be interested in.
Right.
But what it does is it primes me to think, this is a relevant news article. It doesn't prime me to think, who wrote this article?
Right.
You know, it's not giving me that type of information because that's not its job. Its job is just here's the information. But when you're not already in that curiosity mode, like there's just a physiological difference in motivation between being task oriented and being open minded and curious. Task oriented behavior is focused, narrowed vision. It's like the aperture closes in.
Right.
It's like putting your like you do the basketball drills and you do the goggles so you can't
Yeah.
see what's going on. It's like it just focuses your vision so that you can own so that you're not looking around at too much information. So
Right.
you can get stuff done.
So
That's different than when you're open minded and when you're curious, which I would be if I just received a newspaper
yeah.
and I'm choosing what I'm gonna read in the newspaper. When I
Right.
pull out my phone and check Apple News, I'm like, what's the news?
Right.
I'm not asking a deeper question about like it's not as open minded. It's more just like give me the highlights. I'm sitting on the toilet. Just show me in 5 minutes. What
Well,
I need to
okay,
see.
so the in an analog era 50 years ago, I could buy the New York Times and the New York Post and the Wall Street Journal and Newsweek magazine, and I get the liberal perspective, the conservative perspective, and the middle of the road perspective. And I have the entirety of that day or week's news for me to self curate and to expose myself to the range of perspectives.
Mm.
But the AI assistants are training themselves to my preferences. So that's part of the supposed benefit is there's too much news for me to sort through now.
Mm.
So it's going to self-curate based on previously expressed interests.
Right.
So now I'm in an increasingly closed information loop where I only see things I already tend to agree with.
Mm.
And I don't realize that the person sitting next to me is seeing an entirely different set of information that is, they think that is the only information that's out there. I think this is the only information that's out there. And I can't imagine why they don't see what I see.
Yeah, and I think this might be something we can talk more about next time. But I think that that's always what's happening, and now it's just more obvious because the technology is putting that aspect of human disparity on display.
Mm-hmm.
I don't see what you see right now.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine, I can empathize, I can I can discern, but I don't know what you're seeing.
Right.
And what I'm seeing is a product of the narrative that I subscribe to that
Right.
makes sense of what's going on around me, which is not your narrative.
Right.
The thing that unites us is when we can like point to a narrative and agree on it.
Right.
And that's the value of having a text
Right.
where language is a tool, but then we say, here's the document.
Right.
It's not changing. Now we can talk about the black and white. Then that's actually helpful.
Right.
But when the goalposts are constantly moving, as this like uber scientism is, I just think it's been proved once and for all that the more science we lean into, the less possible it is to have objectively definable metrics.
Yeah.
We'll never have AI that is as intelligent as a human because even if we did, we just keep moving the goalposts.
Uh,
Well, that's not really what human intelligence is. Well,
Yeah.
that's an aspect of it, but that's not really all of it. Why would a scientist ever admit, yeah, AI is as intelligent as a human? They have to admit that they agree on a definition.
right.
They'd have to admit that that is that.
Right.
And you can't do that. Remember, there's quantum
Right.
relativity, there's entanglement, there's all of these fun words that talk about how nothing really is anything. It's all relativistic. And
Yeah.
we can't really know, but we have great literature that says that maybe it's over here, but it's like you get to the 20th decimal place and you're like, yeah, but I'm just rounding here because
Right.
it's the 21st and I don't, so that's not, just give me a number. Like,
Right.
just give me something to work with.
Right.
And at a certain point, you have to allow that potential for infinity to become
Finite.
yeah, and in a way that's operative.
Right.
When I pick up like when I need to drive a nail into a board, I can't hold this infinite hammer and just think like all the dead space that's it's actually mostly empty and
Yeah.
the atoms are doing and I don't know what it's at a certain point I'm just using it
Right.
and then the task is done.
Right.
And I don't have to know exactly what everything was. I have to know how to use it. And I think the usefulness of science is decreasing as the knowledge of science is increasing.
Well, what struck me in what you just said, I know we need to wrap up this episode, but potentially because of uh, the benefit of a personal Mentat AI is in my own preferences being reinforced. If I want to read the New York Post, I don't want to read the New York Times. And so it's always giving me more and more of what I want. And even though, like you said, that's always been the case, the amount of information to draw from and therefore the amount of filters to exclude and to isolate are increasingly creating closed systems and closed thought systems, closed information systems, therefore closed thought systems that are going to increase the division and hostility between people. And as we become more logic based and less truth sayer based, we lose empathy for any other position because we are so overwhelmingly convinced by the news feed that's coming to us. And so I can't trust any other perspective. I can't have a conversation with you unless your AI and my AI have already agreed that we could actually interact.
Yeah, unless they've already agreed.
Have your
Yeah.
people call my people.
Yeah, I just imagine this like invisible web over the tops of human heads, which is everybody's AI that like filters what they're able to receive.
And what a spiritual picture that is of the powers of the air that are now becoming technological in nature, even though that what you just described is a spiritual reality.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
Yeah,
Well-
let's end it there.
Yeah. All right.